Greg, why aren't you picking up, you stubborn old coot? Sam Donovan had dialed that number 14 times in the last 24 hours. The rings disappeared into emptiness, like stones dropped into a black well. The hand jutted out from beneath the concrete slab, blue, swollen, with burst capillaries under the skin that looked like a spider web filled with ink. On the ring finger, a wedding band. Sam recognized that ring instantly. He'd helped pick it out himself at a jewelry shop on Main Street in Portland for Greg Chambers, his partner. They'd been young back then, stupid, having just started at the dam almost 40 years ago. Greg had argued about the price. Nancy'll say yes anyway. Why overspend? Sam had insisted. You only get married once. Don't be cheap about it. Yesterday, Greg had gone down to check the drainage gallery and never came back. The dispatcher said he'd gone home early, complained about his blood pressure. Cascade Valley Security confirmed it. Greg Chambers' vehicle exited through the checkpoint at 6:47 p.m. Video footage attached. But here was the hand. Here was the ring with that scratch on the inside. Greg had caught it on the emergency gate valve back in '93, when the two of them, without sleep or relief for 3 days straight, held the dam during the flood while 40 million tons of water pressed down above their heads. And somewhere in the thickness of the concrete, a crack was spreading, one that Greg, apparently, had also found. Dear friends, before we continue, please write which country you're watching this video from. It'll be interesting to see how far this story has spread. Enjoy listening. The rain started back in Willow Creek, 45 miles from the reservoir. The wipers on Sam's old Jeep Cherokee worked overtime, smearing water across the windshield, while Sam Donovan thought about how in 6 days he'd turned 63, and how his retirement papers were already signed. 41 years. 41 years he'd driven this road. First hitchhiking, then on the company shuttle bus, the last 20 years in his own vehicle. He knew every curve, every pothole, every mile marker. Could have driven it with his eyes closed, though he never would. A hydraulic engineer who lets himself close his eyes doesn't live long. Cascade Valley Reservoir appeared around the bend, a massive ink-black expanse beneath a leaden sky. Sam pulled into the overlook, as he always did, not for the view, but out of habit. From here, you could see everything. The dam crest cutting across the valley, the lights of the town below, and the distant mountains dissolving in the rain. They built the reservoir in '62. Sam arrived in '84, a young specialist with a diploma and a head full of ideas. Here, he'd met Tammy. She worked in the technical archives, slim, with a braid down to her waist, and a laugh that took his breath away. Here their son was born and raised, later moving to New York, and now calling twice a month like clockwork. His whole life had passed here, between concrete and water, between instrument gauges and the roar of turbines. Dear friends, before we continue, write in the comments what country or city you're listening from. Enjoy the story. Ridgeview Estates had appeared 15 years ago. Before that, below the dam, there'd been farmland and an old cemetery that was relocated during construction. Then the investors came. Barton arrived with his connections at the state capitol, and the fields became an exclusive, gated community. 240 homes, a golf club, a private yacht dock on the lower tailwater. Sam had written a memo back then. Construction directly below the spillway violates regulations. Zoning restrictions don't allow it. They'd explained to him that regulations had been revised, the safety zone reduced, everything legal, a deputy secretary's signature attached. He put the Jeep in gear and continued toward the service entrance. Rain drummed on the roof with the monotony of a metronome. At the checkpoint, an unfamiliar guard met him, young, crew-cut, in a private security uniform instead of the usual agency issue. Badge. Sam handed over his ID card. The guard studied it for a long time, then cross-referenced it with his tablet. Donovan, Samuel James. That's me. 40 years as a hydraulic engineer. Says so right there. The guard didn't smile. Go ahead, parking lot B. Don't go any further. Technical archives are closed for inventory. Since when? Since today, administration's orders. Sam wanted to object. He'd planned to pull the drainage system blueprints, verify a few things before retirement. But he changed his mind. Arguing with security was pointless. They just followed orders. Better to go through management later. The dispatch room was stuffy and smelled like coffee grounds. Zoe Peterson, the duty dispatcher, looked up from her monitors. "Hey, Sam, I thought you were off today." "Swapped with Lucan. He's got his niece's wedding." "A wedding in this weather? Brave people." Sam hung his wet jacket on the hook and poured himself tea from the thermos. On the wall above the control panel, an old clock ticked. 11:15 p.m. "Is Greg Chambers on shift?" Zoe frowned. "Chambers? No, he left early yesterday. Said his blood pressure was spiking." "Who said?" "Wade. He let him go." Wade Kowalski, shift supervisor. Sam had known him 28 years. Decent guy, competent engineer, though he'd gone downhill in recent years. Wife left him, daughter divorced, grandkids with the ex-son-in-law. Depressing, really. But letting a relief operator go during a storm warning, that didn't sound like him. Where's Wade now? In the turbine hall. There's some pressure fluctuations in the third loop. He's been messing with it since morning. Sam sipped his tea. Hot. Way too strong. Zoe always brewed it like she planned to stay awake for a week. "Zoe, did you see Greg in person yesterday?" She hesitated. "No, I came on at 8 p.m. He was already gone. Security said he drove out." Security said, but with your own eyes? "Sam, what's going on? Did something happen?" Sam stayed silent. He'd been calling Greg since noon, first his cell, then his landline. Mancy said he hadn't come home. She thought he was working late. Then she called back, already scared. "Sam, his truck isn't in the driveway. Sam, have you seen him?" He'd called the checkpoint. They showed him the footage. At 6:47 p.m., a silver Ford F-150 with Greg's plates went through the barrier. A silhouette in a hoodie behind the wheel. Face not visible. Camera too far away. "Show me the footage," Sam asked. The guard shrugged and turned the monitor toward him. There was the truck. There was the barrier rising. There were the taillights disappearing into the rain. Sam watched the screen and couldn't put his finger on what was bothering him. Something wrong, something out of place, like a burr on smooth metal. You can't see it, but your finger feels it. Again, the guard rewound. Truck, barrier, lights. And then Sam got it. "The mirror," he said aloud, "and the headlights." There should be a little pine tree air freshener on the rearview mirror. Green. Smells like evergreen. Greg hadn't taken it down in 20 years. Nancy gave him a new one every Christmas. Superstition of theirs. In this video, it wasn't there. And Greg always drove with his low beams on, even in daylight. Old school habit, said it was safer. But here the truck was running on just parking lights. Greg never did that. The guard looked at him like he was senile. Maybe he took the tree down? Maybe forgot to turn on his lights? People change. Greg never changed. We came to this dam together. I know him like I know myself. Well, whatever. We recorded everything by the book. Exit documented. If you have complaints, file a report. Sam walked out of the checkpoint into the rain. Wind hit his face, carrying spray from the reservoir. Somewhere above, behind the clouds, thunder rumbled. A storm was coming from the west, from the mountains. He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Greg, why aren't you picking up, you stubborn old coot?" The rings disappeared into emptiness. The drainage gallery was accessed through a technical hatch near spillway number 3. Sam knew this because he'd helped design the drainage system back in '87 when they modernized the dam after an incident at a neighboring hydroelectric plant. A sign hung on the hatch. No entry. Emergency work in progress. The lock was new, shiny, nothing like the standard agency issue. Sam looked around. No cameras here, too far from the main buildings, too uninteresting for security. He pulled a key ring from his pocket. Third from the right, universal, fit most Soviet-era technical locks. But this lock was clearly not Soviet-era. He went back to his Jeep, rummaged through the glove box. Toolkit, screwdrivers, pliers, a coil of wire. Tammy always laughed at him. "You're like a plumber, always fiddling with hardware." He'd answer, "An engineer has to know how to do everything, and if he doesn't know, he'll learn." The lock gave way after 3 minutes. Sam descended the metal ladder into darkness. His flashlight illuminated concrete walls, a wet floor, a corridor stretching into the distance. 3 hours later, he found it. Not just the body, though that alone would have been enough to turn his world inside out. Greg lay under a collapsed support beam, pinned by concrete that had crushed his legs and pelvis. He hadn't died instantly. Judging by the drag marks and bloody fingernail tracks on the concrete, he'd tried to crawl out for a long time. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Greg had photographed before the ceiling came down. Sam saw it in the dim glow of his dying flashlight, in the puddles of groundwater that shouldn't be here, in the wet streaks on the walls that spoke of constant seepage. He saw it in the cracks, not small surface fissures, but deep fractures running through the concrete like veins through flesh. Sam Donovan had spent 41 years building, maintaining, and studying dams. He knew how concrete ages, how it breeds, how it dies. And what he was looking at now was a death sentence, not just for the dam, for everyone who lived below it. Greg's tablet lay next to his body, the screen cracked but still functional. Sam pressed the power button with trembling fingers. The battery showed 2%. Photographs, dozens of photographs, cracks in the supporting structures, leaking seams, corroded rebar, and documents, contracts, specifications, delivery receipts. Sam's engineering brain processed the information automatically, even as his human heart kept breaking. The concrete wasn't up to spec. The rebar was cheaper than the project called for. The waterproofing, there was no waterproofing at all, just a thin layer of bitumen where there should have been a multi-layer membrane. Greg had found all of this, photographed it, documented it, and then someone buried him under a collapse that looked perfectly natural. The tablet died. Sam clutched it in his hands, trying to remember everything he'd seen. Then he started back toward the exit. Fast. Too fast for 62 years and bad knees, but he had no choice. He had to tell someone, right now, before it was too late. "Wade, we need to talk." Wade Kowalski sat in the turbine hall control room, surrounded by blinking indicators and the hum of generators. He looked tired, more than tired. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks and had given up on the idea of ever sleeping again. "Sam, what are you doing here? I thought—" "Greg is dead." Wade went still. His face didn't change, but something in his eyes did, something that looked like relief mixed with terror. "What are you talking about?" "I found him in the drainage gallery under a collapsed beam. He's been there since yesterday, maybe longer." "That's impossible. He drove out through the checkpoint. There's video." "That wasn't him driving. Someone took his truck. Someone who knew him well enough to pass through the gate, but not well enough to know about the air freshener or his headlight habit." Sam stepped closer. "You let him go early. Except you didn't, did you? You sent him down there. You knew what he'd find." Wade's hands began to shake. "Sam, you don't understand. I understand plenty. I saw the photos, the concrete, the rebar, the waterproofing that doesn't exist. Barton's been cutting corners since day one, hasn't he? And you've been helping him cover it up." "I didn't have a choice," Wade's voice cracked. "They have things on me, Sam. Debts, mistakes. They said if I just looked the other way—" "How long has the dam been compromised?" "I don't know. Years, maybe. The original construction was fine, but when they built Ridgeview, they had to reroute the drainage. Barton's people did the work. I tried to tell them it wasn't up to code, but they had permits, approvals. Forged approvals. I didn't know that then." Sam grabbed him by the collar. "There are 2,000 people living directly below a dam that could fail at any moment. How long were you going to wait?" Wade's face crumpled. "I was going to retire next month, just like you. I thought if I could just get out—" A sound cut through the room. Alarms. Red lights began flashing across the control panels. "What the hell is that?" Sam released Wade and spun toward the monitors. "Spillway 3, Wade whispered. "Pressure breach. The storm. The water level." The numbers on the screens were wrong. Sam had spent 41 years reading those numbers, and he'd never seen anything like this. Pressure climbing in sectors that should have been stable. Flow rates spiking. And in the bottom corner, a single blinking indicator. Structural integrity warning. "We need to evacuate," Sam said. "Now." The next 3 hours were chaos. Sam ran to the dispatch room, but Zoe was already on the radio, her face white. The monitoring system had detected anomalies. Multiple sensors were reporting impossible readings. Something was very, very wrong. "Call emergency services," Sam ordered. "Get the sheriff's department on the line. We need to evacuate Ridgeview." On whose authority? On the authority of 41 goddamn years. Sam grabbed the microphone. "This is Sam Donovan, senior engineer. I'm declaring an emergency situation. Repeat, emergency situation at Cascade Valley Dam. All personnel to emergency stations." The response was immediate, and not what he expected. "Donovan," a new voice on the radio. Rich, confident, used to being obeyed. "This is Leonard Barton. Stand down." Sam felt ice spread through his chest. "Barton, the dam is failing." "The dam is under control. You're overreacting to a minor sensor malfunction." "I've been in the drainage gallery. I've seen the cracks. I've seen what your contractors did to the structural supports. This isn't a malfunction. It's a collapse in progress." A pause. When Barton spoke again, his voice was harder. "You broke into a restricted area during an emergency repair operation. I don't know what you think you saw, but I assure you, our engineers have everything under control." "Greg Chambers is dead in that gallery. Someone murdered him to cover this up." A longer pause. "Mr. Donovan, I'm afraid you're experiencing some kind of episode. Your concern for your colleague is understandable, but Mr. Chambers left the facility yesterday evening. We have documentation. Documentation can be forged. Bodies can't. Security is on their way to escort you to the medical unit. For your own safety, please don't resist." Sam looked at Zoe. She was staring at him with wide eyes, the radio still in her hand. "Did you hear that?" he asked her. She nodded slowly. "Then you know what we have to do." They split up, Zoe to the emergency broadcast system, Sam to the spillway controls. The plan was simple and desperate. If they couldn't stop the collapse, they could at least try to control it. Open the emergency spillways, release pressure, buy time for evacuation. Sam ran through corridors he'd walked 1,000 times, past control rooms and equipment bays and break rooms where he'd eaten lunch for 4 decades. The building shook around him, subtle at first, then stronger. The dam was groaning. He found the spillway controls in the main operations center. 2 guards were already there, the same private security types from the checkpoint. "Sir, you need to leave this area." "Get out of my way." The first guard reached for him. Sam had never been a fighter, but 40 years of physical labor had given him a certain wiry strength. He twisted away, grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, and swung. The guard went down. The second one hesitated, just long enough for Sam to reach the control panel. Manual override, emergency protocol 7. The codes came back to him like an old song, muscle memory from countless drills. His fingers flew across the keyboard. The dam shuddered. Somewhere deep in its concrete heart, massive gates began to open. The warning siren started 20 minutes later. Sam had managed to access the public emergency broadcast system, something Barton's people had somehow overlooked in their rush to contain him. Zoe's voice went out over every speaker, every phone, every television in Ridgeview. "This is an emergency evacuation notice. A dam failure is imminent. All residents must evacuate immediately. Proceed to high ground. Do not stop to gather belongings. This is not a drill." By the time Barton's security reached the operations center, it was too late to stop anything. Sam was handcuffed and dragged to a holding room, but the evacuation had begun. He could hear it through the walls. Car engines, voices, the wail of emergency vehicles. From the window of his improvised cell, he watched the flashing lights snake down the mountain road. Hundreds of cars, bumper to bumper, crawling toward safety. Not fast enough. He knew it wasn't fast enough. The dam failed at 3:47 a.m. Sam felt it before he heard it, a deep, subsonic rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then the sound, a roar like nothing he'd ever experienced, like the voice of God, if God were angry and made of water. The building lurched. The lights went out. Emergency generators kicked in, casting everything in a dim red glow. Sam was still handcuffed to a radiator when the first wave hit the lower town. He didn't see it. He didn't have to. He knew exactly what was happening, the physics of it, the terrible mathematics of millions of tons of water released in seconds. He knew the speed, the force, the reach. He knew how many people hadn't made it out. They found him 12 hours later, still handcuffed, half drowned when a secondary wave flooded the upper floors. The guards who'd arrested him were gone, fled or dead. He never found out. The rescue crew was from the state emergency services. They cut him free, wrapped him in a blanket, put him on a helicopter. Below, where Ridgeview had been, there was only mud and debris and the occasional glimpse of something that might have been a house, or might have been a car, or might have been a life. The official count would come later. 372 dead. Over 1,000 displaced. Property damage in the billions. And in the wreckage, buried under tons of sediment, the body of Greg Chambers, finally recovered, finally given the acknowledgement that he'd died trying to prevent exactly this. The investigation began before the water had fully receded. FBI agents, FEMA officials, state engineers, insurance investigators, journalists, so many journalists that the temporary command center had to set up a separate tent just to handle press inquiries. Sam Donovan told his story to anyone who would listen. The drainage gallery, Greg's body, the photographs on the tablet, the substandard materials, the forged permits, Wade's confession. Some of them believed him. Most of them wrote him off as a traumatized old man looking for someone to blame. The tablet was never found. It had been with Sam when he was arrested, but somewhere between the holding room and the rescue, it disappeared. Wade Kowalski denied everything, claimed Sam had forced him to make false statements under duress. Barton's lawyers arrived within 24 hours, armed with documentation showing that all construction had been properly permitted, all materials properly certified, all inspections properly conducted. The dam failure, they argued, was an act of God, an unprecedented storm combined with aging infrastructure that no one could have predicted. 3 weeks later, the memorial service was held at the First Presbyterian Church in Millbrook, the nearest town that hadn't been touched by the flood. 1,700 people packed the pews and spilled out onto the lawn. Sam sat in the front row, his arm in a sling, his face a map of bruises and butterfly bandages. Beside him, Nancy Chambers, now a widow, clutched a photograph of Greg and wept silently. The minister spoke of tragedy and resilience. The mayor spoke of community and rebuilding. Leonard Barton, wearing a $10,000 suit and an expression of practiced solemnity, spoke of his deep commitment to supporting the victims and ensuring that nothing like this ever happened again. Sam watched him from across the room and felt nothing but cold, clear rage. 6 weeks later, Barton was arrested at Portland International Airport trying to board a flight to Miami and from there to somewhere without an extradition treaty. He had a suitcase full of documents and cash, a valid passport with multiple visas, and a first-class ticket. Customs agents stopped him at the gate. The investigators had finally found something, not the construction fraud, but a money trail, offshore accounts, suspicious transfers, enough to hold him while they built a bigger case. Wade Kowalski was found guilty of criminal negligence and sentenced to 18 months. His lawyers argued for leniency, citing his cooperation and his previously clean record. The judge agreed. He was out in 7 months. Kyle Hendricks, Barton's head of security, the man who'd overseen the cover-up and almost certainly ordered Greg's death, died in a car accident during the evacuation. His SUV was swept off the road on the outskirts of town. They found the vehicle 2 days later, overturned in a ravine, filled with mud. He was still buckled into the driver's seat. Justice, Sam supposed. Of a kind. 4 months later. The rehabilitation center was on the outskirts of the state capitol, a 2-story building with peeling paint and a small garden where patients walked on paths covered with last year's leaves. Sam Donovan sat on a bench by the window, watching the television in the lobby. The news was on. The trial of former Ridgeview developer Leonard Barton continues. Defense attorneys are arguing that the dam failure was caused by material fatigue and unprecedented weather conditions. Documents allegedly showing construction fraud have not been located in official archives and cannot be admitted as evidence. Sam changed the channel. Leonard Barton has been named to the commission overseeing regional reconstruction after the Cascade Valley disaster. At a press conference, he announced that the new dam will be built using state-of-the-art technology and will stand as a symbol of renewal. On screen, Barton smiled and shook hands with officials, posing in front of construction equipment. New suit, hair perfectly styled. The same confident look of a man who owned the world. Sam turned off the television. He stood, leaning on a cane, a gift from his doctors. Temporary, they said, though they both knew it was permanent. His ribs had healed, his collarbone too, but his body hadn't forgiven the abuse. His knees ached with every step. His heart stuttered on stairs. And sometimes, at night, he dreamed of water, black, ice cold, pulling him down into the depths. He walked to the window. Below, beyond the facility's fence, the flooded valley stretched toward the horizon. The water had long since receded, but the scars remained. Washed-out roads, rust-colored patches in the grass, the skeletons of houses that no one had bothered to rebuild. And there, on the horizon, the silhouette of the new dam. They were building it fast, with fanfare, with television cameras and reports about unprecedented progress. The same contractors, the same permits, the same people. A shadow lay across the new dam, long, dark, stretching across the entire valley. A shadow from a cloud, maybe, or from something else. Mr. Donovan? He turned. In the doorway stood Zoe, thinner, older than she'd been 4 months ago, but with the same stubborn set to her jaw. Beside her, Katie, holding Tommy's hand. The boy was carrying a rolled-up piece of paper. "We came to visit," Zoe said. "How are you?" "I'm walking," Sam smiled. "Doctors say they'll discharge me in a month. Good as new." Liar. Liar, but the walking part's true. Tommy ran up to him, held out the paper. "This is for you, Grandpa Sam. I drew it myself." Sam unrolled the picture. On the paper was a dam, big, gray, just like the real one. And on top of it, a stick figure holding something that looked like a stick. The figure was holding a giant umbrella over its head, and under the umbrella were little houses, trees, tiny cars. Rain poured down from above in blue streaks, but the houses stayed dry. "That's you," Tommy explained. "You saved everyone from the rain." Sam looked at the picture for a long time, silent. Then he crouched, his knees protested, but held, and hugged the boy. "Thank you," he said. "This is the best gift I've ever gotten." They left an hour later. Katie had to get to work. Tommy needed to go to preschool. Zoe lingered in the doorway. "Sam, they called you in as a witness." "I know. Gave my testimony." "And?" "They said it couldn't be verified by expert analysis. The photos Greg took weren't found in the archives. My recording can't be considered evidence because it was made under conditions that don't allow verification of authenticity." He paused. "I dropped the tablet in the radio room when I was climbing into that locker. The flood took it. Never recovered." Zoe pressed her lips together. "So he gets away with it?" "Maybe. His lawyers are good. He's got money." "That's not fair." "That's life, Zoe. Rarely fair." She left. Sam stayed alone, He stood at the window and looked at the new dam, at the shadow lying on the water. Then he pulled his phone from his robe pocket, a new one. Katie had brought it during the first week, when his old one drowned along with everything else. He scrolled through contacts, found the number he needed. A journalist from the regional paper had come to visit him in the hospital during the first week, while he was still drifting in and out of consciousness. Young, persistent, with a notebook and fire in her eyes. She'd asked about the disaster, about the documents, about Barton. He'd refused to talk then, said he'd tell everything at the trial. The trial turned out to be a farce. Sam pressed call. Hello? A woman's voice. Quick, businesslike. This is Donovan, Sam Donovan from Cascade Valley. You came to see me at the hospital. Yes, I remember. Mr. Donovan, how are you? I heard they're closing the case. You said you needed documents. A pause. Yes, I did. I have copies. Another pause. Longer. What copies? Everything. The photos, the cracks, the acceptance certificates, the material specs, Greg's diagrams with his notes, and most important, an audio recording. Sam fell silent for a moment. It's not just sound, it's my voice. I was recording and commenting as I went. Donovan, drainage gallery, located at collapse site where Chambers' body is. Time, 12:42 a.m. Characteristic sound of structural failure audible. I thought if I didn't make it out, at least the recording would be found. He could hear the journalist breathing on the other end, quick, excited. But where? The tablet was lost. The tablet was lost, but I managed to copy everything to a flash drive while I was still in the radio room, before the breach. Old habit, transferring sensor data. The flash drive was in my jacket pocket when the water was tossing me around in that locker. The nurses saved it, along with my clothes. The defense will say it's fabricated, that the files were created later. Let them say it. The original photos are on the drive. Modern forensics can easily prove they were taken with Greg's specific tablet camera. Every sensor leaves a unique digital fingerprint, like an actual fingerprint. Plus, the metadata contains the device's internal ID, and the tablet was officially registered to Chambers. It's in the technical department records. Can't fake that. Silence on the line. Mr. Donovan, this changes everything. Can we meet? He looked out the window. The shadow on the water seemed to shift. A cloud moving, or so it appeared. We can, he said. Come tomorrow. I'll tell you everything. He hung up and put the phone back in his pocket. Outside the window, sunset was beginning. The sun broke through the clouds, lit up the valley, picked out the rusted skeletons of flooded houses in shades of orange. The shadow on the water grew longer, darker, sharper. It hadn't gone anywhere. It remained. But Sam had remained too. He stood at the window and looked at the dam, at the shadow, at the valley below. He thought about Greg, who'd stayed under the rubble forever. They found his body a week later, held the funeral in a closed casket. He thought about Tammy, who was waiting for him somewhere beyond the veil, the one he'd never taken to see the ocean. He thought about Tommy and his drawing, a stick figure with an umbrella protecting little houses from the rain. He wasn't a hero, didn't feel like one. He'd just done what had to be done, same as his whole life, same as always. But sometimes that's enough. The shadow remained on the water, long, dark, patient. And Sam Donovan, 63 years old, retired hydraulic engineer, watched it without looking away. Because someone has to watch. Someone has to remember. Someone has to make sure the world doesn't forget. Dear friends, the story has come to an end, and I have a question for you. Do you think Sam will manage to achieve justice and punish those responsible, or will big money win again? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. Thank you for joining me. Check out other stories in the playlist appearing on screen now.